Hello everyone. Hope you all had a great Diwali with your loved ones. Viruses may be invisible to the naked eye, but their impact can be enormous from global pandemics to cutting edge gene therapy tools. To study them, control infections, or develop vaccines, one crucial step stands out, and that is quantifying viruses. How do scientists measure something that can't be seen? In this video lecture, we will explore the fascinating methods used to determine virus numbers from plaque assays to heme agglutination. Join me as we dive deep into the science behind virus quantification. In order to be studied, the viruses need to be grown and cultured in the laboratory. It is not easy because viruses can neither metabolize nor replicate themselves. They require a host cell to grow. Today, there are various methods of culturing animal, plant, and bacterial viruses. Let us first talk about the cultivation of bacteriophages, which are viruses which attack the bacteria. The bacteriophages are the easiest to culture among all other viruses for the simple reason that bacteria, their host cells, can be easily cultivated in the lab. Phages can be grown in the host bacterial cells, which are maintained either in liquid or solid media. However, it is difficult to assay phages in liquid media. To cool and molten sterile soft agar, the host cell, say E. coli, is added, and to this the bacteriophage sample is added. The mixture is then poured in a sterile Petri plate containing a layer of sterile solidified agar. The plate is then incubated. The bacterial culture grows to form a lawn, but the bacterial cells infected by the phage are lysed and the phages are released to infect other nearby bacterial cells. Eventually, cell lysis will generate clear zones called plaques, as can be seen on your screen. Thus, the bacterial lawn will have plaques indicative of the fact that phages have grown. Let us now talk about the cultivation of animal viruses in chick embryos. In the 1930s, it was discovered that animal viruses could be grown on embryonated eggs. This was easy and also inexpensive. Chick eggs that have been fertilized are most suitable for growing viruses. These eggs contain a developing embryo and have the tissues which are ideal for growing viruses. This figure shows the chick embryo and its parts. The cell surface is the shell surface is first cleaned with a disinfectant and penetrated with a small sterile drill. Samples of viruses can be inoculated into the embryonated eggs at the sites that are best suited for viral growth. Different viruses grow better at different regions and hence must be inoculated accordingly. For example, Rous sarcoma virus, pox virus, grows on chorioallantoic membrane, whereas mumps virus and influenza virus grows better in the allantoic cavity. Herpes simplex virus grows best in the yolk sac, and influenza virus, mumps virus, and avian adenoviruses grows best in the allantoic membrane. After inoculation, the hole is sealed with paraffin wax and then the egg is incubated. A problem with this simple method is that bacteria also grow well in the chick embryos, and hence the effect of viruses cannot be very well determined in bacterially contaminated eggs. But still, this method has proved to be highly effective for the isolation and culture of many viruses, particularly strains of influenza virus and various pox viruses. Let us now move on and talk about the cultivation of animal viruses in cell culture. Cell culture began early in the 20th century with whole organ cultures, then progressed to methods involving individual cells. Cell culture methods became more useful with the discovery that bacterial contamination can be controlled by antibiotics and also that certain proteolytic enzymes like trypsin can free the animal cells from the surrounding tissues. These cells are then inoculated in a specific media in sterile flasks and then they are allowed to grow. The cells grow to form a monolayer. When inoculated with a specific virus for the growth, when inoculated with a specific virus, the growth is assayed by methods like staining and so on. This method is called tissue culture, but actually cell culture is more appropriate. In 1949, John Enders, Thomas Weller, and Frederick Robbins made the discovery that poliovirus could multiply in cultured cells. This finding led to the propagation of many other viruses in cultured cells. There are three basic types of tissue culture cells. Let us first talk about the primary cell lines. These are cells that have been freshly dispersed by trypsin treatment from a piece of freshly removed intact tissue. They consist of a mixture of cell types, particularly muscle and epithelial cells. The problem here is that they are able to grow for a few passages only as diploid cells and hence cannot be subcultured. But they support the growth of a wide variety of viruses and are used for experimental virology when the state of cell differentiation is important. They are also used in vaccine production, like live attenuated poliovirus vaccine strains are propagated in primary monkey kidney cells. Let us now move on and talk about the secondary cell lines. If primary cell cultures are subcultured a number of times, one cell type becomes dominant. These are diploid cells that have picked up a mutation and allows them to be passaged for about 50 generations. Moreover, these cells retain their normal chromosome structure. Among the commonest of secondary cell lines is diploid fibroblast cell line derived from fetal tissues and hence retaining the ability of rapid and repeated cell division. Talking about continuous cell culture, these are the cells that are capable of growing for prolonged, perhaps indefinite lengths of time. They are generally derived from malignant tissues. However, they can be derived from diploid secondary cell lines. Invariably, they have undergone alterations in their chromosomes, both structural and in number. Consequently, they are mutated. The most famous continuous cell line is the HeLa cell line, which has been maintained since 1951. The original cells were derived from a lady named Henrietta Lacks, who died of cervical cancer. The name HeLa is derived from the first two letters of her name. These cells are immortal. The other examples of continuous cell lines are Vero cells from African green monkey kidney, L and T3 cells derived from mice, and BHK21 derived from hamster kidneys. But how do we know that viruses have grown in our cell lines? Let us try to find out methods for evidence of viral growth in cultured cells. Some viruses bring about the death of the host cells, and this results in the detachment of infected host cells from the plastic cell culture flask. The changes start becoming visible as more and more cells are infected. These changes are called cytopathic effects. The cytopathic effects like rounding up, detachment, cell lysis, swelling of nuclei, and formation of fused cells called syncytia may be seen under the light or phase contrast microscopy at low power without fixing or staining the cells. On the other hand, cytopathic effects like formation of inclusion bodies, accumulation of virus particles, membrane blebbing, duplication of membrane, and fragmentation of organelles require high power resolution. The time required for development of cytopathic effects is varied. For example, enterovirus and herpes simplex virus can cause cytopathic effects in 1 to 2 days, whereas cytomegalovirus, rubella virus, and some adenovirus may not produce cytopathic effects for several weeks. Further, there are many viruses like arenavirus, paramyxovirus, and retrovirus which do not cause any cytopathic effects. Their growth is detected by other methods which we will see in the coming slides. Let us now start discussing the various ways to quantitate viruses. There are mainly two types of assays, physical and biological. Physical assays like heme agglutination, direct particle count, and immunological methods quantify only the presence of virus particles and not whether they are infectious or not. On the other hand, biological assays like plaque assay measure the presence of infectivity and may not count all the viral particles, even many of which are infectious. Thus, biological assays are not for enumeration of virus particles but for measurement of infectivity. Let us first talk about the physical methods. The first method is direct particle count. The total number of virions can be counted directly by the electron microscope. The sample is mixed with a known concentration of small latex beads and then coated on the copper grid. The number of beads and virions is counted. This method is good for a virus of known morphology. If the sample is dilute, it can be centrifuged and concentrated first, and then the counting can be performed. The second method is heme agglutination assay. Many viruses synthesize cell attachment proteins which can bind to substituents commonly present on many cell types like RBCs, which have the sialic acid. These cell attachment proteins are present on the virus surfaces and hence virions can bind directly to the RBCs. Moreover, both virions and erythrocytes have multiple binding sites for each other so that when a virus sample of sufficiently high concentration is mixed with an RBC preparation, a network of cells and erythrocytes form. In short, the RBCs clump. In 1941, George Hurst first observed heme agglutination of red blood cells by influenza virus. Thereafter, this method became important in identification and enumeration of viruses, particularly influenza virus. The virus sample is serially diluted and mixed with a fixed concentration of erythrocytes. The mixture is allowed to settle in a specially designed heme agglutination tray containing wells with rounded bottoms. The RBCs, which are not agglutinated, are free to roll to the bottom of the well, where they form a dense, easily detectable cluster of cells called a button. The agglutinated RBCs are not free as they are enmeshed in a network of viruses and RBC and hence cannot roll down to the bottom of the well but rather coat the bottom evenly. One heme agglutination unit is defined as the minimum amount of virus required to cause agglutination, and the titer of virus sample can be calculated taking into account the serial dilution. The highest dilution of virus which can still bring about agglutination is considered to be the heme agglutination titer. In this figure, two-fold dilutions of samples of different influenza viruses A and B were prepared, mixed with chick red blood cells and added to the wells of a 96 well plate. After 30 minutes of incubation, the wells were photographed. Sample A causes heme agglutination up to the 1:256 dilution. Therefore, the heme agglutination titer of this virus stock is 256. The sample in the row B has an HA titer of 128. Let us now move on and discuss the other biological methods. The first is the plaque assay. It is the most elegant and most useful assay for viruses. The method of cultivation of bacteriophages can also be used for its assay. Dilutions of virus are plated on an agar plate containing the host organism. The virion infects the host cell and lyses it and produces the plaque. Each plaque is supposed to arise from one single virion. Hence, counting the number of plaques gives us the number of infectious virions or plaque forming units in the given dilution plate. The number of virions in the original sample can be easily calculated taking into consideration the dilution factor and the volume of the sample calculated. Thus, in this figure, serial dilutions of the virus stock culture are made and then they are added to molten sterile agar containing the host cell, that is the E. coli. After that, they are plated and the plates are then kept for incubation. And after incubation, we can see the number of plaques formed on the Petri plates. Like in our serial dilution plates for bacterial enumeration, we can see that there is a decrease in the number of plaques as the dilution increases. Plaque forming units per ml can be calculated by taking this formula, that is the average number of plaques divided by dilution into the volume of the sample plated. In this case, we can see that in the 10 to the power minus 5 dilution plate, we have 13 plaques there. Taking this formula into calculation, the final PFU per ml comes to 1.3 into 10 to the power 7 PFU, that is plaque forming units per ml. For animal viruses, a sample of virions of unknown concentration is serially diluted in an appropriate medium and measured aliquots of each dilution are seeded onto confluent monolayers of the cultured cells. This infected cell layer is then overlaid with a semi-solid nutrient medium, usually consisting of medium and agar. The semi-solid top layer prevents formation of secondary plaques through diffusion of virus from original site of infection to new sites, thus ensuring that each plaque that develops originated from a single infectious particle in the inoculum. After an appropriate period of incubation to allow sufficient development of plaques, the monolayer is stained so that the plaques are visible. Neutral red is commonly used for staining. It is taken up by living cells but not by dead cells, so plaques become visible as clear zones on a red monolayer as can be seen on your screen. The goal of the assay is to identify a dilution that yields 20 to 100 plaques on a single dish, a number large enough to be statistically significant and small enough to facilitate counting. The concentration of the infectious virus in the original sample can then be calculated by taking into consideration the dilution factor. The resulting value is called the titer and it is expressed as PFU per ml to emphasize specifically that only viruses capable of forming plaques have been quantified. The plaque assay measures infectivity, but this does not necessarily correspond exactly to the number of virus particles in the preparation. In fact, for most animal viruses, only a fraction of the particles, as few as 1 in 10 to 1 in 10,000, may be infectious as judged by plaque assay and direct count. Let us now move on and talk about the next assay, that is the focus or the transformation assay. It is a variation of plaque assay. Some tumor viruses transform cells rather than killing them. The transformation results in cells which no longer show contact inhibition and hence grow in piles or foci of transformed cells on an otherwise normal monolayer. These dense foci stain more darkly than the normal cells in the monolayer and can be visualized and thus quantified by treating an infected monolayer with appropriate stain. Malloney-Murine sarcoma virus can be quantified using N1H3T3 mouse fibroblast cell line in a focus assay. The next biological assay is fluorescent focus assay. It is again a modification of the plaque assay and used to determine the titers of viruses that do not kill cells. The initial procedure is same as that for the plaque assay, but later the cells are permeabilized with methanol or acetone and then incubated with an antibody raised against the virus. A second antibody that recognizes the first is added. This second antibody is conjugated to a fluorescent indicator like fluorescein. The cells are then examined under a fluorescent microscope. The infected cells fluoresce against a dark background, as can be seen on your screen. The next assay is for plant viruses and it is called the plant leaf lesion assay. Plant virions can be assayed by this method. A suspension of sample virus is applied to the surface of the leaf along with an abrasive material like carborundum. This helps to tear small holes in the plant cell wall. Each virion on entering the cell initiates infection and causes a local lesion. This results in discoloration and disfiguration of the leaf and can be easily detected as can be seen in the picture on your screen. With this, we come to an end of this lecture. There are other methods of detection and quantification of viruses like serological methods and many molecular methods which include hybridization and PCR methods. We will, however, discuss them in another lecture. Till then, thank you. Follow my channel and stay safe.